1965. Deep night. Starkville, Mississippi. A local police officer steps backstage and doesn't see a legend. No hit records, no sold-out halls, no myth in black. He sees a man who can barely stand, sweat-soaked, slurring, furious at equipment that won't obey him. A concert already destroyed. A stage left in pieces. The officer doesn't recognize the face. Why would he? In this moment, there's nothing recognizable left. Hours later, the man sits alone in a county jail cell. No audience, no band, no excuses. Just silence thick enough to hear his own breathing. By morning, phones will ring across Nashville. Managers will negotiate. Publicists will erase. An entire industry will agree on one thing. This night must disappear. Because if it doesn't, everything ends. His name is Johnny Cash. And what happens in this cell will decide whether he becomes a cautionary footnote or something far more dangerous. A man who survives the truth. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. Night pressed down on Starkville like a lid screwed on too tight. By the time Johnny Cash stepped onto the temporary stage at Mississippi State University, the crowd was already restless. He was late. Not fashionably late. Late in a way that made organizers whisper and look toward the wings. When he finally appeared, the applause came out of habit, not relief. Up close, it was clear something was wrong. His black suit hung on him like borrowed clothing. His eyes struggled to focus, as if the lights were moving instead of him. The band started without confidence. Cash gripped the microphone, then loosened his hand as if it burned. The first song staggered forward, lyrics landing half a beat behind the music. Students shifted, laughed nervously, waited for the legend to wake up. He didn't. Sweat ran down his face, though the night air was cool. Amphetamines, alcohol. His body was racing, his mind far behind. Midway through the set, frustration replaced confusion. He kicked at a monitor. The sound jumped. He yanked the microphone stand, bending it, then slammed it against the stage. Someone in the front row shouted. Cash shouted back, words blurred, anger without aim. This wasn't rebellion. It was collapse, happening in public. Campus police were called quietly, not because a star was misbehaving, but because the show had turned into a disturbance. When they reached the side of the stage, Cash saw them and stopped. No argument, no attempt to play it off. He handed the microphone to no one in particular and stepped down as if this was the next scheduled part of the night. The car ride was silent. Siren off. Windows open. He watched the streetlights pass, each one cutting his vision into pieces. At the station, fingerprints. A bench. The door closed with a sound that didn't echo. Just a dull finality. Inside the cell, time slowed to something thick and heavy. The rush drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow ache. He sat on the bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the concrete floor. For the first time that night, everything was quiet. He asked a guard for paper and a pen. Not to make a call, not to sign anything, just paper. The guard shook his head and walked away. Alone, Cash pressed his palms together until they trembled. His heart still raced, but his thoughts had begun to settle into something sharper. The noise of the crowd replayed in fragments. The look on the band's faces. The sound of metal bending. "I don't remember how I got here," he said out loud, testing the sentence. It didn't sound dramatic. It sounded factual. That was what frightened him. There was no anger left, no performance, no one to impress. Just a man sitting in a county jail cell, aware, fully aware, that this wasn't bad luck or a misunderstanding. It was a point he had been moving toward for years. The night outside kept going. Inside, Johnny Cash stayed still, finally unable to run, staring straight at the bottom he had pretended didn't exist. Morning arrived without ceremony. The light in the Starkville station didn't soften anything. It made the walls look thinner, the floor more stained, the night's damage harder to deny. Johnny Cash sat where he had been left, head clear enough now to feel the weight of every hour before. No headache yet, just a deep, steady shame that didn't ask permission. The phone started ringing somewhere down the hall. Once, then again. By 8 o'clock, it wouldn't stop. In Nashville, the calls moved faster than the news ever could. Managers spoke in clipped sentences. Promoters lowered their voices even though no one was listening. Someone from the label asked for confirmation, not concern. Another wanted to know if there were witnesses outside the student crowd. The question wasn't what happened. It was who knew. By mid-morning, a plan had formed without ever being written down. Keep it small. Keep it local. No statements. No interviews. Emphasize confusion. Downplay intent. A regrettable incident, quickly resolved. The usual language, polished, bloodless, practiced. Someone suggested money. Quietly. Respectfully. A donation to the university. Something for the department. The sheriff listened, face unmoved, then said no. Not angry, just final. This wasn't a negotiation, he explained. It was paperwork. That refusal changed the tone. Voices tightened. Options narrowed. A junior staffer mentioned a photograph, taken inside the station before dawn. A routine shot. Nothing dramatic. But real. Too real. Within minutes, someone else claimed it had already been handled. Misfiled. Lost. The word disappeared was never used, but everyone understood. Late in the morning, Cash was brought into a small office. The offer was presented calmly, like a favor. Charges reduced. Release within hours. Transportation arranged. No press. No statements. Absolute silence. He could walk out and be gone before lunch. He listened without interrupting. Watched the men talk around him. Not to him. Their concern stopped at logistics. No one asked how he was holding up. No one mentioned the night itself. He nodded once, slowly. Not in agreement, just acknowledgement. As papers were prepared, he caught his reflection in the glass of a filing cabinet. Pale. Older than he remembered. A man being carefully erased while still standing in the room. That was when it landed. Clearer than the arrest. Clearer than the cell. They weren't trying to help him. They were trying to make him vanish for a few hours so the schedule could survive. The realization cut deeper than the concrete bench ever had. When the door finally opened and he stepped outside, the air felt wrong, too open, too forgiving. The town went on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. A student laughed across the street. The night had already been packed away, sealed, labeled inconvenient. Cash walked toward the waiting car, free by every legal measure. Yet something followed him closely, heavier than handcuffs. If this was what rescue looked like, he understood the cost. And for the first time, he knew exactly why the cell had felt more honest than the morning. She arrived without announcement. Not with a press car, not with a phone call ahead. Just a borrowed sedan pulling into the gravel lot outside the Starkville station while the morning heat was still settling. By then, Johnny Cash had already been released, already handed off, already moved as a problem toward a solution. He was supposed to be gone. June Carter hadn't heard it from him. That detail mattered. She learned from a fractured chain of voices. Someone backstage, someone's wife. A name passed quietly with a warning not to repeat it. An arrest. Mississippi. A mess already being folded away. Inside the building, the air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. A deputy glanced up, recognized her, then looked uncertain, as if fame complicated the rules. She asked to see him. Not demanded. Asked. She was told it wasn't necessary, that everything had been handled, that he'd be leaving soon. The phrases were gentle, rehearsed, meant to close doors without slamming them. June didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue the logic. She simply stayed where she was, purse in her lap, eyes steady. Time passed. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. Eventually, someone relented. Not because she insisted, but because she didn't leave. They brought him into a small room, no windows, 2 chairs. Cash stopped when he saw her. The surprise drained what little composure he'd managed to collect. He looked at the floor, then at his hands. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. There was nothing left that sounded true. June sat across from him and waited, long enough that he finally looked up. "You're still alive," she said. Her voice was calm, almost factual. That's the main thing. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reassurance. It was acknowledgement. She didn't touch him. Didn't ask what he'd taken or how much. Didn't comment on the night, the show, the broken equipment, the calls already moving across state lines. She had no interest in cleaning anything up. When the subject of silence came up, how it would be easier for everyone if this stayed buried, June shook her head once. "If you hide this," she said quietly, "you won't stop here next time." That landed harder than anger ever could. Cash felt something shift. Not relief, not hope, but clarity. Everyone else saw risk and damage. She saw trajectory. The difference unsettled him. A man from the hallway interrupted, reminding them of schedules, cars, flights. June stood. Cash followed. At the door, she paused, turning just enough to be sure he heard her. "I won't help them erase you," she said, "but I won't lie for you either." Then she was gone. Cash walked back into the sunlight alone. The plan was still in motion. The silence still waiting. But something irreversible had happened in that small room. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him without fear, without excuses, and refused to look away. If this night disappeared, she was right. The next one wouldn't. The fire did not announce itself as disaster. It began as a small, careless thing. Embers coughing into dry brush somewhere deep in Los Padres National Forest, where the night air carried sound farther than sense. Johnny Cash had driven up there to be alone, the way he often did when the noise inside his head grew louder than any crowd. The pills kept him awake. The whiskey slowed his hands. Neither gave him clarity. Morning broke thin and sharp. Smoke hung low between the trees, barely noticeable at first, like fog that didn't belong. By the time he understood what was happening, the wind had already decided for him. Flames ran uphill with purpose. Heat snapped branches like bones. There was no heroism in how he left, no last-minute rescue. He backed away, coughing, eyes burning, heart hammering with something close to panic. Rangers arrived fast, then more. Helicopters, sirens that cut through the forest as if accusing it. By afternoon, the damage could no longer be contained by quiet phone calls. Hundreds of acres burned, wildlife lost. The word condor began appearing in reports. Rare, protected, irreplaceable. This time, the name attached to the incident was not anonymous. It was his. The label drafted a statement before nightfall. Accident. Exhaustion. Unclear circumstances. They slid it across a table toward him, confident muscle memory guiding their hands. He read it once, then again. "No," he said. The word came out flat, without force. Still, it stopped the room. They tried another version, less legal, more human. Still no responsibility. Still a soft landing. No. Someone suggested disappearing for a while. No interviews, no shows. Let the story burn out the way fires always did. Cash shook his head. He was tired of things burning without being named. When the authorities spoke publicly, they did not soften their language. They didn't need to. The facts were enough. For the first time, the press didn't look away. Headlines didn't flinch. There was no hiding behind confusion or charisma. Cash read every word. He understood then what Starkville had warned him about. Silence had limits. And once those limits were crossed, the reckoning didn't ask permission. Friends called with advice. Lawyers called with strategies. All of it sounded distant. What mattered was simpler, heavier. He had caused something that could not be undone. That night, he sat alone, watching news footage flicker without sound. Blackened hills, officials pointing, numbers climbing. There was no metaphor in the fire. It was just damage. Real, measurable, final. For the first time, running felt dishonest. He didn't defend himself, didn't offer explanations. When asked, he said little. When advised to vanish, he stayed. It wasn't courage, it was acceptance. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the shame, a decision took shape. Not to be forgiven, not to be spared, but to stop pretending that consequences were negotiable. The fire had already answered that question. The damage didn't arrive all at once. It spread quietly. By late 1966, the calendar thinned without anyone announcing it. Dates vanished. Venues hesitated. Radio programmers stopped returning calls, not out of outrage but caution. Johnny Cash wasn't banned. He was something worse, uncertain. No one wanted to be the one who guessed wrong about him. On the road, the crowds were smaller, the rooms less forgiving. Applause came late, if at all. He felt it in the pauses between songs, in the way promoters avoided eye contact. The legend still existed, but it was starting to float away from the man carrying it. The pills followed him more faithfully than people did. Not for escape anymore, for endurance. For getting through days that no longer promised anything on the other side. He took them knowing exactly what they were doing, without the comfort of denial. One night, a musician he'd played beside for years asked to speak privately. No accusations, no speeches, just an apology delivered with care. He wouldn't be joining the tour. Not now. Maybe later. Cash nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Reputation was contagious. So was distance. June didn't soften her words when she finally drew the line. There was no drama in it. No tears. Just a condition stated plainly. Treatment or separation. Not as punishment. As fact. He didn't answer her right away. Instead, he withdrew. Not into hiding, but into something quieter. Hotel rooms without the television on. Long stretches without speaking. He stopped trying to explain himself to strangers and stopped asking for absolution he didn't believe in. Songs began to form that no one had asked for. Slow, spare, uncomfortable. No hooks designed for radio. No redemption arcs. Just sentences that refused to look away from failure. The label didn't like them. He didn't argue. Some nights, he sat alone after the band left, listening to the hum of empty rooms. The silence didn't accuse him. It didn't forgive him either. It just stayed. "I'm not strong," he admitted once, to no one in particular. The words felt unnecessary, but true. "I'm just not dead yet." There was no breakthrough waiting at the end of that year. No turning point disguised as grace. Only the steady erosion of what had once protected him from himself. And strangely, that honesty, unmarketable, uncelebrated, began to matter more than survival. The legend was shrinking. The man, finally, was not. The idea sounded wrong the moment he said it out loud. A prison, not a benefit show, not a television special framed as charity. A real prison, with locked doors and men who wouldn't pretend to be impressed. Johnny Cash brought it up in a room where people were paid to calculate risk, and every one of them saw the same thing: a final mistake. They reminded him of the radio stations that still wouldn't play his records, of the tours that barely broke even, of the fire that reporters hadn't forgotten. A prison concert, they said, would seal the image he was already struggling to escape. Cash listened, hands folded, eyes down. When they finished, he told them he didn't see another reason to keep going. That ended the argument, not because they agreed, but because they were tired. Columbia signed off the way people approve doomed experiments, quietly, with expectations set low. If it failed, it would fail small. The negotiations took months. Paperwork, conditions, warnings about what could not be said, could not be recorded, could not be promised. Folsom Prison agreed with caution, not enthusiasm. This was not entertainment. It was a controlled risk. In the days before the show, Cash rewrote everything. He stripped the set list of safe material, took out songs that offered distance, left in the ones that told the truth without apology. His band noticed. No one objected. The morning of the recording, he learned the tapes might never be released. There were concerns, marketability, public reaction. He accepted it without comment. By then, the outcome had stopped mattering. Backstage was a concrete hallway. No dressing room, no mirrors, just the sound of gates closing, each one erasing the world outside. The men gathering inside the room were not cheering yet. They were watching, measuring. When Cash walked out, dressed in black without symbolism or statement, the noise rose fast, sharp, honest. Not applause, recognition. He didn't greet them like an audience, didn't explain himself. He let the silence stretch before the first chord, long enough for everyone to feel exposed. When he began to sing, his voice didn't push. It settled. These weren't songs about prisoners. They were songs for people who knew what consequence felt like. The room responded in laughter, shouts, stillness. Nothing polite. Nothing borrowed. Cash didn't perform strength. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He stood there as himself, unarmored, knowing every man in front of him could tell the difference. When it was over, there was no encore, no speeches, just the sound of doors reopening. As he walked back through the corridor, Cash understood something clearly for the first time in years. This hadn't saved his career. It had saved his voice. The record came out quietly, the way things do when no one is sure they should exist. There was no victory lap planned for at Folsom Prison. No polished rollout, just boxes shipped, radio copies sent with low expectations. Some executives assumed it would satisfy a small, stubborn audience and disappear. Others waited for backlash. Instead, it stayed. Not in headlines at first, but in conversations, in letters, in living rooms where people listened without talking. The songs didn't sound new. They sounded settled, as if they had been waiting. Cash noticed the shift slowly. A different tone in interviews. Fewer apologies disguised as questions. Journalists began circling back to the old incidents, the arrest, the fire. But something had changed. The stories didn't land the same way. Not because they were softened, but because he no longer flinched. When a documentary team offered to clean things up, he declined. They promised balance, context, a chance to reframe. Cash told them no. The past didn't need editing. It needed to remain intact. Success arrived without celebration. Chart positions rose. Concert halls filled again. But the applause felt distant now, less essential. He didn't lean into it, didn't chase it. He had learned what happened when noise became a substitute. Some nights, alone, he thought back to Starkville, to the cell, the bench, the sentence he'd said out loud when no one was listening. He understood now why that moment refused to fade. It wasn't punishment. It was a line. Everything after had been a choice. He hadn't become cleaner all at once, hadn't turned into a symbol or a sermon. What changed was simpler and harder to explain. He stopped running from the truth of what he was capable of in both directions. The industry kept trying to turn him into a lesson. He resisted that too. Late one evening, after a show that ended without ceremony, he sat alone and let the quiet settle. No phones ringing, no plans being made on his behalf. Just the steady awareness that he was still here, unhidden. If the night in Mississippi had truly been erased, none of this would have followed. No fire faced, no rooms emptied, no prison gates closing behind him. The story survived because the damage did. And for the first time in a long while, Johnny Cash wasn't trying to outrun it. He was standing where he was, breathing evenly, letting the silence mean exactly what it meant. Nothing more, nothing less.